This conference will now be recorded.
If you want to start recording the conference. All right. Any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda?
I just was asking earlier if we could talk about at all, just giving us any preparation for thinking about moving back into PUD mode. So if there's time at the end, if you could just maybe give us some assignments to start thinking about in that direction, if there's time.
Okay, so let's see where we're at the end. I think in general, we want to talk about kind of our path forward over the next, few meetings. So, anything from the public for items not related to the agenda? Okay. Planning Commissioner comments or staff report? Monica?
A few cool things. First of all, in the Affordable Housing Committee meeting this morning, the O'Brien brothers brought a inclusionary housing question or just update to the committee. But what was interesting is they're kind of fast tracking some of the inclusionary affordable units because of the pending available federal funds that are coming in for affordable housing. So that was really good to see, and great to see inclusionary kind of working to have them thinking in that way. And now they're going to be able to hopefully take advantage, hopefully, of some of those funds. So I'm sure we'll learn more about it, but that was good news. The other thing is, during that meeting, they had an awesome presentation from Laura LaPierre, who, Jessica, I don't know if you know her. She's from the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. And she gave an amazing presentation about wetlands, about how the state looks at 1, 2 versus 3. Just really good information. The committee ended up making a motion to ask the city council to receive that presentation before getting our Article 12 for their public hearing. So if you see it on the city council agenda, I suggest you watch it because it was very helpful. And also, she said that very soon, UVM students have been working with them, and they will be soon releasing a draft report of the 100 most populated towns in Vermont. The report is going to do a comparison of environmental standards among those 100 towns. For example, what buffers are all these towns using, so that we can have a sense. So that the students' year is ending, so they'll be done soon, and we should have access to that report because that will be very helpful.
Great. Does anybody else have anything?
I do.
Bernie, I had a question about how I see quite a lot of people attending. I'm on a very small screen, so I'm only seeing us. How are they going to signal to you if they want to get your attention or speak?
I will keep an eye on the chat, and if I see things coming up on the chat, I will read those. And if I happen to miss any, people can feel free to point that out to me.
Bernie, I had a follow-up.
Yep.
Well, first of all, I apologize I can't chair tonight. I'm at the end of a migraine, hopefully the end, and I just didn't feel like I could do everything. But I did want to at least listen into the conversation and give an update on the city council meeting from last week that I attended. I think Michael and Monica were also in the audience as well. There were a few things. There was the interim zoning extension public hearing. The city council did vote to extend interim zoning until November 13th, and they talked about that being a hard deadline, and they really encouraged us to wrap up all of our work before then, which does mean for that to happen that we would be warning our public hearings of everything in October sometime. Then we also, there was a short follow-up from our April joint meeting. They did have the questions that we had presented to them. They felt like they were interested in coming back to the questions about the PUDs and the Southeast Quadrant, like following the wrap up of the work on the environmental protection chapters that we're working through now. They felt like it would be better to have that kind of, they specifically said put a pin in it before they kind of talked about those other areas. And I did ask if there were any additional comments or discussion of what we had talked about with the environmental protection standards, and they did not have additional specific comments for us. I gave them a little update on what we had talked about with the I-89 exit study. Really almost exactly read our comments that we had sent to them. And they were talking about that more, and I gave them an update on the Swift Street extension and what we had talked about with making those changes to the official map, and a little bit about that process. So it's kind of a big meeting for stuff related to us. So that was it.
Good, thanks, Jess. Does anybody else have anything? Paul, any staff report stuff you'd like to share with us?
Just one fun announcement, which is that midweek last week, the regional bike share program in South Burlington, Burlington, and Winooski officially relaunched as an electric assist e-bike program, doubling the number of bikes to 200. And currently it's the same locations in South Burlington, but they're going to be adding about a dozen or 14 sites around our communities over the next couple of months. And it's very exciting. I gave them a try, and it's sure a heck of a lot easier to go up the hill than it used to be. And any hill is the hill.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I encourage everyone to give them a try. They're currently at the airport, at Healthy Living, and at the U-Mall in South Burlington. We'll be seeing some additional sites coming online pretty soon.
Yeah, I think most of the major news networks locally gave a story on those. At some point, Paul, when we're all done with this, maybe, it might be worthwhile to have a discussion on what kind of rules might be applicable or necessary for e-bikes. You know, in terms of both riding on the road as well as riding on the bike paths.
Absolutely, yeah. And to answer Sarah Dopp's question, they're working on it. Some of the bikes I think are going to get relocated to other places around the country. There's been some discussion about getting some of the older bikes to some of the key sponsors, and also getting potentially getting some of them to lower income organizations so that they can share them with their constituents in this area here. So to be determined, but those are some of the things on the table at the moment.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of local organizations that are looking for donated bikes for sure.
Yeah. And they're owned by Gotcha, so they're not owned by us. They're owned by the company, but they do, you know, they recognize that there's a value in seeing those bikes being used in appropriate ways. So,
yep, excellent. All right. Does anybody have anything else? All right. So then we will move on to discussion and responses to public input on the regs. And I'd just like to preface our discussion with Jessica had sent out an email reminding everybody that really the purpose of tonight's discussion is to see what questions people have and to attempt to answer the questions, and if not, to log them so that we can answer them in the future, but to not have a policy discussion. We want to wait to have the policy discussion until we've received all the public comments and then we have our public hearing. As Jessica pointed out in her email, it wouldn't be fair to people that may have yet to comment or attend the public hearing to start talking about potential changes until the process is done. So we will have time, obviously, when the process is done, to have discussion, and maybe at some point towards the end of this meeting, we can talk in general in terms of process, how we think we might address the comments once we get through the comment period. But we'll save that discussion until towards the end of the meeting tonight. So with that, I think there were some, yes, Michael?
That means we will just try and answer some of these questions tonight, but not, as you say, not get involved in any policy. And then the detailed responses to these questions would be handled after the May 20th public hearing, or at the May 20th public hearing.
Yeah, probably a little bit but after as well.
Okay.
And we can talk, like I said, at the end procedurally how we want to do that. You know, whether we want to kind of group comments into categories and try to answer on a category level, or how we want to do that. So we can talk about that a little bit, maybe a preliminary discussion tonight to get people thinking about how we want to respond. And then, you know, as we, you know, get through the public comment period and the public hearing, we can kind of nail down exactly what we want to do in terms of response. But, you know, I've got some ideas, and we can start thinking about it tonight. So.
Yeah, because there are quite a few specific questions that we might be able to answer right off the bat in all these letters that Marla has included in our package.
Yeah. So we do have letters in the packet. So maybe just briefly, I know also Paul prepared some maps, and there was also some information on wetlands. So why don't we start with the mapping, because I know there were a lot of questions around that. So maybe start with the mapping, Paul, if that works for you, and then maybe talk a little bit about the information that we have on the wetlands, and then see if that kind of addresses you know, a grouping of the comments that we already have, that, you know, then we don't have to go through each individual one. And then we can go maybe through the letters afterwards and collect comments afterwards. And Roseanne did ask if we would be taking comments tonight. And so, yes, we will, if they're different, or yeah, if they're different than what we've already gotten. So yes. So Paul, do you want to spend a couple minutes on the mapping that you sent out earlier today?
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer and help steward any of the questions and specific answers that you want, that you're looking for. What we sent out today, and this is available on the interactive map viewer, and we just got PDFs a couple of hours ago that I'm happy to share with whomever, and we'll post on our website tomorrow morning. But this is trying to answer some of the questions that folks had of how do the existing and the proposed regulations line up with one another. And so what's on the screen here is in orange are the existing regulations. The different shades of blue are where there are new environmental protection standards in areas that are outside of the orange. The green on here represents areas that are conserved in some way, and so you'll see that those are sitting over the blue because they're already conserved in some way. And then you'll see sort of a gray cross-hatching, and the gray cross-hatching is the Natural Resource Protection District. And so the intent there is to show, you know, some of the areas that are proposed to be added under the environmental protection standards are already in the NRP. So this is trying to be as transparent as possible about what's changing versus what isn't. And so and this is the source of the numbers that were presented and posted on our website. So I'm not
Paul,
sure if folks have.
Well, I was just going to ask, is it accurate to state then that we're continuing to regulate the brown and the blue we're adding to the brown? Is that an
when you say
accurate
brown,
statement?
do you mean sort of a mustard yellow?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. So yes.
Baby diaper
yellow
color.
are existing environmental protection. I'm drawing a distinction between that and it's the sort of background aerial photo that looks like sort of dirt brown.
Right.
And in a few minutes, I'll show you a separate map. I know there's been some questions about understanding a little more specifically the role that wetlands play in here, knowing that the wetland mapping is it's our best guess, but it doesn't necessarily have legal force until somebody delineates it. Duncan?
Hey, Duncan, did you have a question?
So we had a number of, excuse me, quite a number of questions of folks asking, what has been added. And if I'm reading this map correctly, anything in kind of that light blue that's not covered by NRP or anything else, that's what's been added?
Light blue or dark blue, yes.
So anything in the light blue that doesn't have NRP over it or green or yellow, that is new. That's land that's been added.
Correct. So I'm going to zoom into an area here just so we can look at it a little bit more specifically. So you'll see here, just let my computer catch up for a second. There's a blue outline around a number of the orange areas here. Mm-hmm. That shows the added the areas where you change the wetland from 50 feet to 100 feet buffer. That's the dark blue. And then sort of near the bottom middle of my screen, you see a little patch of light blue that does not have cross-hatching over it. That's showing the cross-hatching, again, is the Natural Resource Protection District. So that light blue is likely either a habitat block or a habitat connector that otherwise was not previously regulated.
Okay, that's a habitat connector.
So for all those folks who had questions about where and what has been added, they can look at this map, look at those dark blue boundaries around the yellow, and then also the light blue, and that's what has been added.
Right, and if it has either that sort of green over it, which is the conserved land, or it has the cross-hatching, then people can make an interpretation of their own as to whether that is additional protection or not. But the green is somewhat conserved land or conserved in some form, and the cross-hatching is the Natural Resource Protection Zoning District.
Okay, and Paul, then just to clarify, there are a couple people had questions on the ability to discern colors, and that could simply be the the computer they're using. I mean, mine, I can discern the colors on. So I guess my point is that these maps are or will be available on our website for people to go in and zoom and drill in on their own to look at. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I guess just a point, it's a great question, and just a point to that, like the old school transparencies of when you put, one transparency on top of another, what the person who made the maps here was trying to do was to show everything possible. What happens when you put two colors on top of one another is you wind up getting a slightly different color underneath it. And so it's you either have to black out everything under it, or the colors adjust a little bit with different things under them. And it's just a quirk of making these things. So the more you zoom out, the more it looks like there's a lot of colors. The more you zoom in, you can see why there's one on top of another.
So for example, in the upper left-hand corner, we had existing protections in kind of the mustard color, and then we've got the green, which you said was the NRP?
The cross-hatching is the NRP.
Yep.
And then the fact that it's the golf course on top of that is we designated that as being somewhat conserved because of all of the various different designations to it.
Right.
Or
and so that's why
similarly
the mustard color kind of lightened up there, is because the green is overlaying it. So you have essentially kind of more than one protection there. You've got our regulatory protection plus the NRP plus it's somewhat conserved.
Right, and the same thing over on the far right-hand side of the screen there. That's the you see that the label, it says Muddy Brook Wetland Reserve. So that's owned by Winooski Valley Parks District. It's also a wetland that they own, and so this tries to show all the different things. A user individually, I believe, can alter how strong the shading is, but that's what this is trying to show is all these things together.
Right. Okay. And then the blue and dark blue are additions.
Correct. So I think that the main takeaway here is if it's showing as blue, either dark blue, which is a hazard, that's sort of purpley blue, lavender blue as a level 1, or the sky blue in those little pieces as a level 2, and nothing else, that's what's new. So along Butler Drive, you see there's that sort of sky blue bit, that's a level 2. And next to it is the very dark blue, and that's a hazard. So I think that if users are trying to understand, that's the easiest key message here.
Okay. I am getting some comments that people are still having a difficult time understanding this. So
maybe
I think
maybe Mike would answer some of that. If I could, I ask Paul. There's quite a number of areas where the buffer, the 100-foot buffer or 50-foot buffer, is over an existing development or a bunch of homes and so on. So I see that at where did I see it? But around Butler, there's a area, and then perhaps at Meadowwood, and the one that caught my eye was South Point, because it can't be conserved; it's already built. So have we deducted those?
We have not tried to deduct areas that are built from it. I think that would be we could take a shot at it if the commission wanted to, but that becomes a very challenging data exercise.
I would imagine so. But because I guess a lot of the questions that certainly that have come to me are how did we calculate these acreages? And if what's the methodology, and can we really assume that it's accurate? That's why I asked that question.
I think, Michael, you're raising a good point, and I guess in a minute I have a separate map that shows the wetlands. The wetlands, more than anything else, are somewhat variable in terms of what whether the numbers are 100% accurate in terms of acreage, because the only way to ascertain wetlands is to field delineate them. The best that we can do is use what we have in terms of data, but you're correct that they may be bigger or they may be smaller, or there may be some examples where the text of the regulations have said that for example, a forest block on on a single family house lot of less than an acre doesn't apply on that parcel. It's really hard to get down to that level of mapping for acre by acre.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably, the wetlands that are shown are probably overstated rather than the other way around. if I was looking again at South Point and that huge swath of wetland, from what I've seen and heard, is, I don't know, it doesn't seem to follow the rest of it, which comes through from the golf course, and it goes all the way down through the Great Swamp. So there may be areas where it's overstated.
Go ahead, Monica, and then I have a comment as well.
Yeah, I think that one thing that would be very helpful to the public is if we could better communicate the point of these maps in the first place. Like, these are exercises. What we're looking at right now is not going to end up, this particular version is not going to be the map that ends up in Article 12. These are being prepared to help people visualize where the resources that Article 12 is working to protect to a greater degree, kind of where they are. But these interactive tools are not going to, after interim zoning, right? I mean, somebody correct me, but these are not going to necessarily be called on any further. This is really a demonstration of where the resources are, and that the most important thing is to really look at the language of the regulations and discuss the elements within that. I mean, I just think it might be helpful because we're asking a lot of hours to go into finessing the maps, but they're only to demonstrate what the actual regs are, which is what we really need to make sure people are understanding and getting their questions answered about, not so much colors on maps, which I just hope people understand that. And if I'm off mark, can somebody let me know? But I do think that would be helpful.
I guess, Monica, I would say that's generally correct. The one place I would make a modification to that is that the habitat blocks are mapped as that's where the boundaries are, similar to a zoning district. So as proposed, the habitat blocks, that's where they are measured at. For other resources, they would be field delineated, or let's say for floodplains and things, the FEMA maps are the ones that control. We've incorporated them here, but if FEMA changes their maps, then our maps change automatically with them.
I understand that, but is this exact visual that we're looking at going to be the LDR tied habitat block map?
The habitat block portion of it, of this data, will be the same ones that you have in the regulation.
That's what will appear on the official, I'm not going to call it official map, but the map that is tied to Article 12 that the DRB will look at specifically, right?
Correct. And that one is in the packet that was warned for public hearing. There's a static version of the map that shows that.
And my point is that is the only map that will be used after this process is complete. What we're looking at right now will not be used any further. The DRB will not use this, correct?
Correct, because a lot of the elements of what's on here are planning elements.
Right.
That said, we do expect to have a version of the adopted map that people can zoom in and zoom out of, so that they don't have to, so that the DRB doesn't have to stare at an 8.5 by 11 map and figure out where the boundary is.
Okay, so that, I guess that's the point I was hoping that the community can understand, is that these are planning tools right now that we're using to help articulate what's in the document, but these are working documents that will not be used later. So
Right. So for example, the wetlands in here, Monica, would be a starting point for a property owner to say, as I'm beginning to think about my project, it looks like there might be wetlands here. That would be a good key to them early on to go and hire a wetland consultant. They would be able to use this map if they want as the very first step in front of the DRB before they spend money. But before they get to the decision-making stages with the DRB, they would have to have those field delineated. So think of it as sort of like a funnel. They could use this as a starting point for their planning, but then they would need to spend the money to hire a consultant for, say, field delineation of wetlands.
So does that mean that this exact visual will continue to appear on the city's website for people to use in the future? I thought it was
Not this exact one, because this exact one also shows conserved areas and things like that. It's hard to use the word exact because these are layers in a digital map that we can turn layers on and off. So it would be similar to, but not this exact one.
Okay.
So I have kind of a list of people here to comment, but I just had one question, Paul, and maybe a comment. Number one is Sandy brought up the point, is the library open now?
Yes.
I believe, yes, they just reopened. I'm not sure if it's all facilities or only to go in and look for books.
The answer
Okay,
is yes.
so
Yes, the library is open.
so along those lines, I have two comments. Number one is for people that may not have a computer or a computer that easily loads to zoom in and zoom out, maybe the library is a resource for that. The other thing I wanted to ask Paul is a lot of times on these maps, sometimes, particularly when we do in-person public kind of meetings, we produce a large storyboard kind of thing, size map.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if it might be worthwhile to print this out in some kind of, large scale version with a legend, as a hard copy kind of thing, and put it in, like the library or a couple other public places where people that aren't quite as computer savvy can go and look at something that's, a hard copy picture with a legend to it.
I think we could do that. We have it as an 11 by 17, and I think we could scale that to a full-sized one and find a couple of locations, whether it's the front window of City Hall so that folks can look from the outside but see through the glass, yep, or at the library. Happy to facilitate that.
Yeah, I'm just looking for kind of other mechanisms for people to be able to visually see it in some form that's as friendly as it can possibly be, and so that maybe we can do that, and so that after people look at it, then if they still have questions, we can tweak maybe, but I think it might be worthwhile to give people as many different resources and ways to look at this as possible in varying forms of simplicity. So anyway, Paul Engels was first and then Michael was second. So Paul.
Okay, a couple questions. Looking at the light blue in the left side of what I can see as a screen right now, that's near Farrell, just above Farrell Park. That's UVM property, and I assume that the other property on the other side of Swift Street is also UVM property. And we have that.
Almost all of it, yes, Paul. I would say 90% of what you're seeing on both sides of Swift Street is owned by UVM.
Okay. And it is safe to say that anything that's light blue or dark blue is what we have added, correct?
That is correct.
Without having lines across it. Okay, so does that property, all of that property together, is that the property that's the 974 acres? The light blue?
That is citywide, yes.
Citywide, yes, yeah.
So I do want to point out, and Sarah Dopp actually made the comment, we are using acreage terminology down to the nearest, 92. And really, Paul, I think we should emphasize that these are approximations. So I'm not sure how to, convey that other than to say it, but, it's an approximation. It's,
That should be
so-
emphasized because we've used those figures and people are taking that as the holy grail.
Okay,
And now
okay.
we're realizing it's not.
Could
exactly.
we get this in order here?
I'm sorry. All I see is a map, so I don't know who's sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Paul, were you done?
Well, no, I mean, if it's an approximation or not, I mean, is it approximately 500 or approximately 1,500 or approximately 200 or is it
And that's what the numbers were intended to
but
point
it's
out.
only 974.
Right.
So we should have accurate information. This is not exploration of Mars.
Well, except
Yeah,
that,
I mean, the
Go ahead,
wetlands,
Paul.
unfortunately, the only way to do it is to field delineate every single wetland in the city. So what I can't say to Michael's point earlier, the existing wetlands may be bigger or smaller than what they are, and the proposed ones, buffers on them are a factor of that. There's really, unfortunately, this is our best guess based on the state, our best estimate based on the state data, but until each site is delineated, and then a delineation is only valid for 5 years, it's the most accurate that we can get.
right. And I would also add that it's the same with stream buffers, because our old reg was measured from the center of the stream, and the new reg is from the stream bank. And, it's, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but essentially impossible to delineate where the stream bank is on any particular stretch of stream.
Unless it's been mapped as a river corridor by the state already, correct?
Right. Okay.
So our biggest
Michael.
ones we think we've got accurate.
Okay. Michael, you were next.
Yes, I was going to say, I wanted to say this earlier. It's unfortunate that we've raised these provisos this evening, because the public has been reading all the articles that we've put into the other paper and Front Porch Forum, and they have come this evening with the expectation that the 974 or 142, depending on where you're looking, is accurately depicted in the maps that have been referenced in all this publicity that we've done. It's unfortunate that we didn't explain that to them when we wrote these articles in the City News and in the other paper and in Front Porch Forum and others. I think we'll be taken to task for not explaining sufficiently what we're talking about.
Well, I think that's what we're trying to do now, but,
but
I guess
weeks
everybody's
late.
credit, people have been asking for numbers, and, the staff has been, doing the best they can to produce some level of definition over what we're doing. And you're right, Michael, we probably could have done a better job in the beginning to say this is all approximate. But on the other hand, we've been trying to make an attempt to help people understand, what we're trying to do in terms of regulation.
Bernie, can I respond directly to that? Just because I'm the
Yep.
one who. So every time we've talked about those numbers, we talked about a plus or minus. Like when I referred to those originally at the city council meeting, we talked about the margin of error. The margin of error is also talked about directly on the sheet with the charts and the numbers that's actually on the website. It talks about how it's a plus or minus. And then this isn't new because we actually talked about this at our last meeting where Alan Strong had actually made the suggestion that the most variable layer is the wetlands. So in order to kind of hone in on the accuracy of those numbers, at that meeting, we requested information from the Regional Planning Commission to help us understand how much of that acreage even has a plus or minus, because a lot of it are like lines that are specific. So Paul actually has that information, and I think could actually bring that up now to help better define that plus or minus acreage, you know, based on that wetland information, which is, as we discussed our last meeting, the biggest variable, you know, other than the fact that the stream bank lines may shift in or out. And in that case, it would always be larger. So in the case of the streams, our mapping is a little narrow because we weren't mapping from the edge. So I think if, Paul, if you brought up that wetland information, it would kind of help us hone in on that map accuracy.
Okay, Monica, did you have something while we're bringing it up? You had your hand going.
I guess the quick one was there in one of the listening sessions, the concept came up that in whatever map we do end up posting, can it be documented on the map somewhere, like which items are actual and which items are estimated? Like the habitat block is actual, the wetland are estimated. If that's explained on the map itself that's attached to Article 12, that could be helpful.
Certainly we can take a shot at that, Monica. It is at the beginning of Article 12, and we can certainly, you know, map making is tricky because you don't want to put so much in there that people can't read anything, but we can certainly take a crack at it.
Okay, Paul, you want to go ahead with the wetlands?
What you're seeing here, and again, I'm going to zoom in to a part of the city, so feel free to have me go somewhere else. But the blue here represents the wetlands and the buffers as proposed by the Planning Commission. I'm just going to show it as a single thing first. So it's all this blue. And then the cross-hatching over it, those areas with the cross-hatching are the areas where the only regulatory protection on the land is that cross-hatching. There are no other regulatory protections to that land. So I'm going to add I'm going to add in this red that will make it a little bit easier. The red and the red shows all the other protections that exist, like NRP or its city park. And the gray here is where there's wetlands that overlap with those other protections. And what you wind up is the blue with the cross-hatching is wetlands only.
And are those wetlands, as we're defining them in our proposed regulations, or are those
correct
existing
yep,
wetlands?
With the 50 and or 100-foot buffer wherever as you elected to do it.
Got it.
So again, I'm happy to zoom in anywhere here, but I think that the question, as Jessica flagged, was, you know, understanding that the wetlands are the most variable. How much land in the city are things where a field delineation may change the extent to which this area is covered or affected.
Okay. Duncan.
Just a quick question. These are all class 2 wetlands, yes?
Yes. We don't have mapping of class 3s, unfortunately, and there are no class 1s in South Burlington.
Okay.
Michael?
Yeah, I was just looking at something in the chat, which is that many of the people who are attending this evening have asked for a very, very simple map, a map that shows nothing else but what is newly protected under Articles 10 and 12. And we don't seem to be able to give them that, and I think we should try.
Paul, do we have a layer that just shows newly protected? I know that the converse to that is people have asked us to show addition to what was previously protected. So we've been asked both, but
so for example, going back to this map here, what I'm understanding is the question is, could we show only the blue and purple and nothing else?
I believe that's correct.
So yes, it is technically, it is certainly possible if the commission would like that. It's, I guess my note would be that it may look a little bit strange because it'll be missing all of the things that people would think of as being sort of the primary resources, like our major rivers and things like that. But it's certainly technically possible. I can just ask our mapping folks to delete everything that's not the blue and purple.
Or
and
does
NRP.
does the web version allow turning that stuff on and off?
It allows turning it on and off, but it doesn't allow you to. They're layers on top of one another. So if you turn off the yellow, all you're going to see is more blue under it. So if to Michael's question, if folks only want to see that which is newly added and nothing else on the screen, we'd have to make that as its own digital layer or layers.
Right, because it overlaps in a lot of cases.
Right, because the
previously
new blue,
protected.
for example, the new wetland standards incorporate everything from the old wetland standards. So if I turn off the old wetland standard, what you're going to see is a larger blue area.
Right, which would be misleading because we're still protecting the old stuff.
I wouldn't describe it as misleading because I'd say that's the new rule. But if somebody's objective is what's new, then it wouldn't be showing only what's new.
Right. I don't know, Michael. What do you think?
I see that it's not easy because you'd have to.
Well, I just don't want it to be misleading either. That we just show the blue and then we're not showing all the stuff that we're still protecting.
Yeah, no, we could show what's currently protected in one color and what's new in blue, which is what we've got. But I see the difficulty for the mapper in that you'd have to disappear the NRP because what's under the NRP doesn't count. So I see that it's a difficult mapping operation, but it might be worth doing if it's not. We have had so many requests for just that that I think we may have an obligation, if I can put it that way, to provide it.
Yeah, and I guess philosophically, I don't have a problem with providing it. My concern is that it becomes more confusing and misleading because to me, what we're showing here does it for me, and that the mustard color is what exists and the blue is what we're adding. And so that's just me. It sounds like it's unclear to some people, but my concern with removing the mustard is then you end up with something that's to some maybe even more confusing. So I guess one thing, if I can, that I would just add in is there's still some role of Article 10 and 12 in areas that are either NRP or otherwise conserved. So, for example, if to take the dog park at Wheeler, the dog park has to avoid wetlands on the property. So even though the property is conserved, there may be certain activities that are allowable and are still subject to the natural resource protection standards. Or in the NRP is very strongly conservation oriented, but if you have a certain amount of acreage, you can put a couple of homes on that. The homes would still be subject to the wetlands
standards, and the way you've got the NRP language written, you can't have any homes, yards, or driveways within a hazard or level 1. And so we're happy to show only the new and exclude those areas, but they still do have a legal effect in certain circumstances in those areas.
You know, what I tried for myself, I took Meadowwood as an example because I know we can see what size lots there are. So if you took that, the light blue that's outside the NRP, you know, you can calculate it. It's about 20, maybe 10 or 15 acres. But you know, you can't do that with all of the bits and pieces, and you can't do that with the buffer, the 50-foot or the additional 50-foot buffer around these wetlands. So it's very hard to calculate the acreage unless there was a known methodology that the CCRP used to do it.
Right. Well, Michael, what they use.
That's why there's
Right.
some skepticism about the mapping.
Right. Well, I guess what I can say is the numbers are based on what you see on that map right now. It's a mapping. The numbers are drawn from just subtract A from B, and that's where they are. It's no more or no less than what this map shows.
Yep.
And it's subject to the same. It's hard to take citywide data and get accurate numbers on things that can be a matter of feet.
Mm-hmm.
Duncan.
Yeah, I mean, there's some funny little bits and pieces. If you just south of Van Sicklen Road, there's a blue area, and it's mostly NRP, but then there's a little chunk in the middle, which is maybe 3 acres, but it's obviously in what's new because it's pale blue and has no cross hatching on it. So there's lots of those little anomalies, or not anomalies, but things that are very hard to calculate.
Duncan. Duncan.
Yeah, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. So I just want to repeat something that Bernie said that I think bears repeating. The information that I think a lot of people are looking for is shown on this map, if I'm understanding it correctly. Anything that's in that blue, the light blue, the 3 shades of blue that is not covered by anything else, that is new. I think that's what everyone's asking for. Where are the new lands that are covered? And it is shown on this map. I think Bernie, you said it very well. If it's not covered, if it's blue and it's not covered by anything else, that is something new. Is that correct, Paul? Am I stating that correctly?
Yes.
So it's on this map. I mean, you've got to look a little delicately, but it's on here.
Yep.
And
Okay.
I agree, if you take all the other context out, it's going to look a little wonky. But if people just want to see what, because we have certainly had that question from a number of people.
Yep.
I think people are very concerned about what did you conserve and where is it?
Okay.
It's shown here.
Yep. Let's take a minute to get some public feedback. So I've been kind of scrolling through the comments. So let's do this. Why don't we start? Andrew Chalnick had asked if he could provide a comment. So we'll do Andrew, and then Roseanne, and then Sarah Dopp, and then if there's people after that, let me know. But we'll do those 3 to start with. So
Thank
Andrew,
you.
if you want to kick off.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Look, to me, I think that the maps are very helpful and do show what we've been asking for. The colors could be a little confusing, but I think it does show it. So thank you for putting that together. I do have one comment and then maybe a couple of questions. So a small comment, in some of the other tools, that I think have been reviewed over the past months. There's some area near the high school that is shown as publicly owned and conserved that's not shown here on this tool. So there's some acreage that appears in light blue on this tool that maybe I think should be light green, unless I'm reading these other maps incorrectly. So that's kind of the first comment. I don't know, Paul, if you know if that was a mistake or that was intentional, but on all the other tools, right around the high school is this kind of large conserved area. Yeah, right there. Anyways, you can take that away. I'm not sure what the right answer is there. But then and then just a question about the calculation of the 974. I just want to make sure I understand explicitly. The conclusion is that if it's light blue or grayish blue and dark blue and not NRP, that collectively adds to 974.
So if it's not, can you repeat that, Andrew?
No, the dark blue, the light blue, that's not cross-hatched, that collectively adds to 974?
If it's not cross-hatched and it's not covered by either the yellow or the green, so if it's just showing through as blue, that should be the, again, approximately 974.
Because I have to say, to my eye, I mean, if South Burlington is about 10,000 acres, so you're saying that area is about 10% of the city. I mean, that's really hard to see. It looks like at most 2%. It just, I honestly, I question that calculation. It just doesn't, by eye, it just doesn't look accurate. It doesn't look like those areas are 10% of the city. But that's and maybe just one question for you, Paul. If the 50-foot buffer, was on the NRP area, was that also taken out or was that included? Like, how was that calculated? Do you know mechanically?
Mechanically, and I will verify this with our mapper, but if it was within the NRP, then it was taken out of that number.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, because maybe that would account for some difference, but again, I don't know. I mean, you can look at it too, but does it look like 10% of the city to you? It just, it doesn't.
Well, maybe at this point, maybe we can Paul just ask the RPC to just, verify, what they did, verify the number.
We
I don't
have
think
done
we can.
before, and we want to be accurate with it. I'm happy to go through with them and go sort of step by step through the process and make sure that the numbers are accurate.
Okay. So anyways, thanks again. I mean, I think that the tool is pretty cool. So thanks.
Cool. Roseanne?
Yes, thanks, Bernie. I'm not going to beat the maps to death, but for those of us with old eyes and don't have the sophistication on using interactive maps, and that includes a heck of a lot of people, it is very difficult to try to interpret this. Andrew, young man, young eyes, does this a lot, and he can see it. All right, old woman, old eyes, hard to see it, especially when you're telling me to look for colors that are under other colors. But okay, I've said that. The second comment I have to do is I'd like to make is on wetlands. So it appears as if from what you were just discussing, that part of that 974 newly protected acres includes wetlands. But wetlands are regulated by the state and have to be field delineated. So I don't understand how you can, well, maybe you're not including them, but I thought I just heard somebody say that's where some of them, that's where some of the acreage comes from, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense that they have to be field delineated and they can, expand and contract. And one last question before Paul answers that wetland question. And it has to do with the words you are using. So I hear you saying you're protecting X amount of acres. or you're preserving X amount of acres, or there are X amount of acres conserved. Each of those words means different things. And to the public who doesn't understand it, you hear those words and you think, oh, this is forever protected. And I don't think that's what you're doing here. I think you're just rezoning, and in some future time, another council can rezone it back. If you really are trying to communicate that these lands can never be built upon, then they have to have a conservation easement. So I think you need to define your terminology and not lead the public to believe that you never have to worry about, you know, these things, these lands ever being developed because they are conserved, because I don't think they are. I don't think we have any conserved lands except for maybe Bread and Butter Farm. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Paul, do you want to answer the wetland question?
Sure, absolutely. So two things. One, currently, wetlands are regulated by the state, by the Army Corps of Engineers at the federal level, and by the city. We each have regulations that apply to wetlands. The question that was asked about, are they included in the 974? The Planning Commission chose to expand the buffer on wetlands in certain parts of the city from 50 feet, which is our current rule, and also is the same rule that is used by the state, to 100 feet. Where the draft regulations propose to expand it from 50 feet to 100 feet, that is counted in the 974 because that is newly proposed to be protected through in development review. And then just sort of a side note to that, one thing that's not captured in the 974 is that for wetlands as well as certain other resources, the draft regulation places additional restrictions on when and under what circumstances any impacts to those resources can take place. They've been narrowed up. So the draft wetland standards are both wider than the state and also more stringent than the state standards as proposed.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So that means you are including just the added buffer area, not the wetlands at all, but just the additional 50 foot, correct?
Correct, because the 974 is only intended to represent newly regulated. The 50 foot was already regulated. Right. It's only the added, where you see the very dark blue. I know that it's hard to see this map, but where you see the dark blue sort of around the edges, that's the 50 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Sarah Dopp.
Yeah, I would just like to quickly read something that we prepared obviously before this meeting, and not knowing just how the tenor of this meeting would go or where it would take us with the conversation. It does repeat some of the points that have come up here tonight. We weren't sure that they would come up, and that's why we prepared this. But if I could just quickly read this, and then I'll send it to you after the fact. In a little over a week at the public hearing on Thursday, the 20th of May, residents will have the opportunity to comment on proposed changes to South Burlington's land development regulations. That is why, for the fourth time, we are asking the Planning Commission to produce simple paper maps showing the new areas that would be protected under the draft regulations and the areas that would lose protection. Despite reading the draft text and reviewing the electronic interactive maps, we still cannot see the areas in the city where the city staff say an additional 974 acres of land will be protected, 142 of which are in the southeast quadrant, the SEQ. We can only see only around 30 or so acres as newly protected in the SEQ. And this map is extremely helpful, so I'm not in any way dismissing that. Unfortunately, the text of the regulations and the computerized maps are extremely hard to understand for the average layperson. That is why we and others have asked repeatedly for a few simple paper maps with lines drawn around the newly protected areas. 2 paper maps would show the changes in a clear, straightforward manner. Map 1 would show only the newly protected areas under the proposed regulations, which is what we've been talking about. and set next to this one with the mustard yellow and the blue, I think that would make quite a powerful statement. And map number 2 would show any areas which are protected under our current land regulations, but would lose protection under the proposed regulations. Having these maps, and that would be a similar one of just highlighting the areas that are losing protection. Having these maps is essential because our interpretation of the draft text and maps is drastically different from what has been stated in articles in the other paper. For example, our analysis of the draft regulation indicates that not only have only a few additional acres been protected in the SEQ, but some areas that were protected under the current regulations lose protection under the draft regulations. Protecting the open and rural lands in the SEQ from housing developments was the reason citizens asked the City Council to enact interim zoning in 2018. If our interpretation of the text and the interactive maps is accurate, then the proposed draft land regulations could do the opposite of what interim zoning intended and allow more housing developments on open lands in the SEQ. We need to have these maps well in advance of the public hearing, which is why we wanted to articulate that tonight. Could you provide them by the end of this week? And I understand the presentation of this map that's on the screen right now. As I say, it's very, very useful. But we just thought something low tech, very quick and dirty, and maybe that's not possible in this technological age, would just tell the story really vividly for the average person. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Sarah. So Paul, we did talk about having a blow up posted on the window of City Hall with a legend. Can you just take a look at Sarah's letter? And I kind of hear what she's getting at, and that's just a map with a Sharpie marker circling some of the areas. So if it's something that we can be done easily and clearly, and taped to the window along with the other map, I guess I don't see a downside to that. But go ahead, Paul.
So yes, absolutely. And I guess my question for you all is, detail and readability are sort of, they're not always best friends with one another. And so, the map that's on the screen here shows a lot of detail for somebody who might want to say, well, I appreciate that it's new standards, but how does that relate to the Natural Resource Protection District? Or I appreciate that it's new standards, but is it also a park under there? Or, I want to know if it's a hazard versus a level 1 versus a level 2. How much, this has sort of skewed towards the side of let's give people the most information that we can. We could say, we could make one color blue and say it's a hazard level 1 or level 2. We're not distinguishing between it. It would be easier to read, but then a level 2 is not a no build area. So I guess that's what I would love to get a little bit of feedback. Are we skewing in the right direction in a blow up map, or do you want us to go simpler? But simple means that there's more asterisks.
Well, so I'll give my take and then people can chime in. But I mean, my vision would be the map that you currently have on the screen blown up with a legend. And then Sarah kind of mentioned in her letter 2 different fairly simple maps. One, a map with a Sharpie that circles areas that we've added, and one with a map that circles areas that we've subtracted. And just put those next to, an aerial photo with a Sharpie next to this map in the window. And
LDRs for dummies, if you will.
So anyway, maybe Paul, if you want, just maybe we can take a look at Sarah's letter, and if it's something we can simply do. I'm not proposing doing anything different with this map other than blowing it up and providing a legend and showing it in the window for people to walk up and look at. But if Sarah's letter has some merit in terms of Maps 101 with a Sharpie and an aerial photograph, and if that helps people, I certainly don't have a problem with doing it. But once you take a look at it, Paul, maybe you can let Jessica and I know afterwards.
Sure.
So.
And Jessica just noted we do have 2 static maps that I'll share with. I shared with the commission this afternoon. Sarah, I'm more than happy to share those with you immediately, and I'm happy to have a chat with you or anyone else about, hey, is there a way that we could make this clearer for folks? It's tricky because so many of the changes are not big Sharpie circled things. They're a 50-foot buffer on a wetland.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I appreciate the goal.
View, that's all. Just one additional quick view for folks.
Okay. Sandy Dooley. Sandy, did you have anything to add to the discussion?
I'm sorry. I'm okay. Just a minute. Sorry.
You want me to come back to you?
No, just a minute. I think it'll work. Okay. I didn't really ask, but one of the things is, I think with the maps is the silent majority. I happen to be in my 70s and I have no problem seeing the colors. Maybe I'm unusual, but I'm thinking of the silent majority may be happy with the maps and you're not hearing from them. So they may be working better for lots of people than you may think. The other thing, I was interested in information about who did the calculations that came up with different numbers for the South Burlington Land Trust, and what what tools did he or she use so that those numbers could be compared to what the Regional Planning Commission numbers produced. And only my last thing is, I think it's very difficult visually. I think optical illusions of all these little strips. They just, to me, my understanding is they look like they add up to be a much smaller number than they actually comprise. So that's, but the last thing is, you're doing great work, and I really appreciate it. So carry on.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. Francis, I think McDonald wanted to make a comment on habitat blocks.
Yes, thank you. I was kind of struggling with how to put my note in there.
No, I've seen it. I've been waiting for you.
Yeah, it looks different to me on my end, but anyway, yes, I have some concerns. The habitat blocks are looked at differently than what we've been talking about so far on the maps, in that the habitat blocks are fixed designations, and they are level 1, and so they present restrictions. But in the 20 habitat blocks that were identified by Arrowwood were reviewed quite a while ago, at the end of September and early October. But I found that the methodology that was used seemed to me to be backwards. In that case, when the blocks were discussed, there was a buffer, but the buffer was actually subtracted from the block. And I don't see that we're doing that anywhere else. In the wetlands, it's always added. And so that buffer, when it was subtracted, it created some different nuances on the buffer. And when they were looked at, the buffers were analyzed and sections were subtracted. And I find that if we're looking to protect open space and wildlife habitat, it seems contrary that we're actually subtracting things and reducing, the sizes of those blocks. And I know that Arrowwood in their study did use buffer as a concept, but they were only really using it to rank the blocks. They identified 20 blocks. They wanted to know which were the more important. And so they compared the outer edges to the center core, and blocks that are big and have a lot of area for wildlife would rate higher than a long, thin one that doesn't have a lot of protection. So basically, I just uncomfortable with the way that the analysis went, and it also seemed to be, I guess, looking more from a perspective of is this area on the outer edges, is this suitable for development? And rather than is this area on the outer edges, is it suitable for wildlife? So I think the questions were being asked in reverse of what I would expect if we're looking to protect open space.
Okay, thanks. And we did receive several comments from others with respect to the, what to do about the buffer on habitat blocks. And I don't think we're going to get into a policy discussion tonight, but Monica, you're waving, so go ahead.
Yeah, and actually, Francis has brought this point up before, maybe in a listening session or something, so I appreciate that. Paul, can you clarify, please, the habitat blocks that we have mapped, they're not only the core, they're the core, right?
So, yeah, so Francis was correct. Thank you, Francis, for taking the time to look through the report to note that the inner buffer that is referred to by Arrowwood was to identify, as he said, how much the ranking of the value of these in, say, a habitat block that's a big circle versus one that is fingers, of how much area is far away from the edge. So that's an accurate statement. The methodology that Arrowwood did was to include areas that are mature forest areas, as well as areas that are in substantial transition. So if you were to go and look on the ground, there are areas that would be considered to be very forested, and there are areas which might be, within the last 20 years have begun to transition into forested. That's probably the best way I would describe it.
Okay.
So can I just circle back on that? So what has been in all the listening sessions and everything, because this is supposed to be a night where we're presenting the types of comments and questions to prepare in relation to the habitat blocks. I think that there is confusion about whether the habitat blocks are only the core and that we've disregarded buffers, which is not what the habitat blocks are mapping. It's not what the habitat blocks as mapped do. But the second thing is that, yes, we did make some decisions within the Planning Commission to alter some of the lines, to Francis's point, and there's questions about our methodology for that, which we should be prepared to talk about. But also, there seems to be some confusion from people about if a wetland should be relooked at every 5 years, shouldn't a habitat block? Can we have a field delineation of a habitat block line? I think we need to be very, as somebody said, for example, if I remove a bunch of the invasives, will that change my habitat line? So I think we need to be very clear about that somehow, that no, this is not something that's field delineated. This is a, South Burlington determined line based on the Arrowwood report. But I just wanted you to know that I had heard that a few times about trying to understand, can it be field delineated and can it change over time and all of that. So we just want to make sure that we're addressing prepared to answer that.
Great. No, that's a good point. Do we have, I think I went through the list of all the public that I could see in the chat box. Is there anyone else from the public at this point that would like to chime in with a comment? Okay, I'm not hearing any. Monica, you have your hand up again.
Sorry. I wanted to, I don't even remember who said it now. Oh, Sarah's request for the map showing what we no longer protect. This is also something that's come up in a number of the sessions. By us separating the work on Article 12 with the PUDs, I think it creates a little bit of a disconnect in that in the current regulations, there's a reference in Article 9 to the comp plan, and the comp plan includes map 7 and 8. And the map 7 and 8 includes, for example, grasslands. That's where I think that there is a question from the public of like, hey, the current regs say comp plan says map 7 says grasslands, and your Article 12 doesn't say grasslands. So that can be seen as a, okay, we're no longer protecting grasslands. We need to be very clear about that. Are we or are we not? And what I mean by that is how much were the grasslands before really protected? Okay, I think we need to make sure people understand that. And the second thing is helping people understand that once the PUDs come into play, if the conservation or whatever it will be called PUD, to Roseanne's point, if the conservation PUD is accepted, grasslands may appear on a list again of a resource that can be protected. So I worry about putting out to Sarah's comment about putting out a list of something that is no longer protected, because it might imply that it had higher protections than it did before. So Paul, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've probably said it as well as it can possibly be said, Monica, which is you described the bread trails of Article 9 to the comprehensive plan. There was one significant application in the city in which that subject came up, that covered one of the resources within there, that the board made a determination that they did not have sufficient information on the delineation of it in order to render a positive decision. That didn't get further tested by the court because the application didn't proceed. We've not had one that looked at grasslands or ag soils or anything like that. So I can't answer the question, and I don't think it can be answered as to what the effect of it would have been, given that it's a series of bread trails and not a specific standard in the regulation itself that said this. And so I think that's why we've equivocated to a certain extent, because it's not a it was and now it's not, or it wasn't and now it's not. It's a there isn't an answer that can be more detailed than that.
And so to further that, though, same point, if the conservation PUD does come through as we are drafting it, again, those elements can be considered in priority, like to something that is a grassland or an open ag soil can be prioritized above another resource in that conservation. So it's kind of like these other resources are not forgotten. They will ideally. And the second thing is that didn't come out of that city council meeting, which I was a little disappointed because I would have loved to hear them talk about this, was
I see you, Michael.
Does the city council think that conservation PUDs should be the only choice in the SEQ? I don't know where everyone here stands on that, but if they were to do that, then absolutely more of these resources would get a protection through the PUD, but still not in Article 12. So I just, breaking these two processes apart, Article 12 to PUD, is a little bit tricky in this particular conversation. And that's where I worry about the maps and the acreage and the, you know, I think it can be misleading to show something knowing that this conservation PUD is right around the corner, and in reality will ultimately hit the market at the same time, because the city council is going to probably do everything at the same time. So
Okay. Yeah, so good points, Monica. I think that though, we want to be careful not to get into talking about policy, because I think that when we review the comments that we've gotten, we have gotten several comments on grasslands and agricultural lands and the use of the maps in the PUD, or I mean in the comp plan, and so I think, you know, when we have our policy discussion, we're going to need to sort all that out to an extent, because there were comments, and then, you know, quite frankly, there were comments kind of from the other end of the spectrum that said that, you know, we're overstepping. So, you know, we've got a ton of comments, and when we have the policy discussion, we're going to need to figure out where we end up on this and what language we have in the.
Right. I was not trying to bring up policy. I was just trying to warn anyone who's going to create a map that shows what we're no longer protecting. I was just trying to raise that. I would wonder about presenting a map like that without some further explanation.
No, that's definitely a good point. Michael, you've been waving.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time on this, but I think I don't have them in front of me, but there were 2 letters from a homeowner in Meadowwood, Daniel Seff, and I think he laid out very clearly why we should not abandon the maps 7 and 8 that we've just been talking about. So instead of spending a lot of time on it, I think that we should read his, and I will read it again, because I think it'll give us very, very insightful guidance.
Yep, and it will definitely, that and all the other letters we received will definitely be part of our policy discussion for sure. Let's see, other public comment as a last chance. Does anybody have anything they'd like to pipe in with? Not hearing anything.
Paul Engels had a comment.
Who? Say what?
Paul Engels had his hand up.
Oh, okay. He's not showing up on my screen. Go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
Bernie, yeah. The map that's going to show things that are lost, will that also include the things that we've removed from the Arrowwood report?
Well, I'll give my answer and then everybody else can chime in. I would say no. I think that the map should only, the maps that we prepare should only show, you know, what we've added per what's written in the current regulation, and what we've, to Monica's point, very carefully taken out per what's written in the current regulation. So I wouldn't intend to, you know, make the Arrowwood report because it was advisory to us. So that's my opinion. Duncan?
I would back up what you just said, Bernie, because it's the things that were removed from the Arrowwood report were not areas that were protected previously under any regulations, unless they were NRP, which I don't think we removed any NRP, but it's not something that was lost. It was something that was adjusted. It was not protected before.
Right. And we had a significant conversation on the Arrowwood report and, you know, fingers and whether to include a finger or not. And, you know, I would say that, you know, again, when we have our policy discussion, if people want to revisit you know, what we did with the Arrowwood report, you know, I think, you know, we can certainly revisit it when we discuss during the policy discussion. But in terms of mapping, I would recommend just keeping it to regulation versus new and existing. So, Monica.
Can I just propose a thought that I feel that Paul has already provided the map of what has been lost, in that when he overlaid the new Article 12 draft, I'm not saying it's easy to, maybe we need to make it easier for people to see, but he overlaid the draft Article 10 and 12 on top of comp plan maps 7 and 8. And to me, that is where, if there's anything that's lost, it would be in a comp plan map. And I don't think that we should represent it in any other way than how Paul did it there, unless there's an evolution of that. But that to me feels like the safest, most responsible way to make this statement, because there is this question of, I mean, I think one of the reasons we're doing everything we're doing is because of the lack of clarity in the current regs. And so I think that this, as an example, like, so you can see anything blue hatched, right? The blue cross section there was from one of the comp plan maps that's no longer in the green, so it's not protected under Article 10 and 12. So my recommendation is to stick with exactly what Paul has here, but make it as easy for people to see as possible, but not make a change to it, because there was one, Paul, that you did that was literally taking, oh, okay, maybe that's map 8. There it is. Okay, thank you. So that's map 8, and you can see like the grasslands up in the upper right, and you know, the information is there, but it's putting a picture on top of a picture, and it doesn't need any alteration. To me, that feels the safest map to show people, to articulate what is not being carried over from the comp plan map.
Comments from the Planning Commission? Jessica's got her thumbs up. Paul Ingalls, unfortunately, your little window isn't showing up. Did I answer your previous question, or do you have any comments on what Monica just said? Only because I can't see you on my screen.
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Duncan.
Yeah, I mean, also, if we're going to do this, are we going to reference what level of protection those areas that are not included had before? Were they all primary and secondary? Is that what we're?
They're so undefined, Duncan. This is the problem. If you go to look at the language in Article 9, it's like, refer to the comp plan, you know, avoid it.
That's my concern. That's my concern, is that we're, you know, the expectations of these were, you know, totally like that grassland up at Meadowlands Park. I don't think that was all protected. That large area of grasslands, it's identified as grasslands, but what protections did it have? That's my point.
Right, and to that point specifically, Duncan, the Meadowlands was outside of the southeast quadrant. The standard that Monica's referring to was only a southeast quadrant standard. Okay. So even that part of it, the grasslands that outside of the southeast quadrant weren't covered at all, or weren't even referenced via the comp plan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Roseanne, you had a brief comment?
Yes, it's just a general comment, because I've heard it now from 3 different people. You're saying you understand it, so therefore it should be good enough. I don't think you're hearing the fact that some of us don't understand it. And we wouldn't be asking, we're not trying to make your life harder. We're just trying to, you know, get clarity. You've been doing this for a long time. But to say, well, it's clear, it's on the map, I can see it. You know, great. Some of us cannot. And you know, all I can say is listen to us if I am the only one who has ever said, I don't understand this, I can't interpret it, I want to see what you took out, then never mind. One person in a city of 20,000, never mind. But I think I got people calling me, asking me what things mean. I don't know why they're calling me. Please listen to us. Some of us don't see what you see, and all we're trying to do is understand. And the fact that you understand it doesn't help us at all. So.
Okay, thanks, Roseanne. And I think, you know, we've asked Paul to take Sarah's letter and see if we can tweak it. So hopefully we'll be able to come up with something. Monica.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to get back to that because I want Roseanne to know. I mean, I have heard Roseanne, I've heard others say this. And Bernie, I think that you just, I actually am recommending to not do that portion of Sarah's letter. I also do hear Roseanne's concern. I've been in listening sessions before where we try so hard to articulate something and then it confuses an issue. And there was an example of that between Roseanne and I where I tried to make it clear, I tried to explain something, and clearly I didn't do it very well because she left with a different impression than I was trying to explain. So I'm just afraid that the more we try to create another map, another version, it's going to create more confusion. And what I would ask, just to be clear, because when we asked Paul to go back and look at doing Sarah's letter, I disagree with doing what we're losing, but instead, to Roseanne's point, if there's anything we can do to what already exists to make it brighter colors or something, bigger focus on certain areas, that's what I would recommend at this point. I would not recommend creating something new. And I'm sorry, I understand Roseanne will feel that I'm not listening, but I've seen enough confusion that's why I make that recommendation. It honestly is to be helpful and not to sound like I'm not listening.
Okay. Other comments? All right. So I guess to just close the loop on Monica's comment. So we'll start with the easy one first. So we're gonna take our map as presented tonight and blow it up and put a legend to it. We're gonna try to take, and to the extent that we can, and simplify a map that just shows the new, if possible. And I'll just say that, you know, maybe Paul can draft something up that we can look at before making it public. And then to Monica's point, because I get, Monica, that, you know, we don't want to misrepresent things that were not written in regulation before. But if there's areas that that were regulatorily protected before that are not regulatorily protected with our current draft, that would be good to show.
Like maybe, Paul, a red circle on that map that you've already done, on that map 8 overlay, like a red circle around those areas where the comp plan has some that's overlapping, so that someone can go and look within the red circle and then look at the index and understand. Maybe that would help identify those areas.
Okay. Paul, are you, okay. I mean, I think the overall comment is we want to try to have something simple and understandable, but not have it confusing and conflicting. So with that great guidance, Paul, is there something that you can maybe tweak up for us to consider? Jessica.
Yes. And just to sort of close the loop on one question that seems to be circling out there. The Monica referred to some language in the regulations that make a reference to the, in the current regulations that make a reference to the comp plan. Setting that subject area aside, there's nothing in the draft regulations that proposes to reduce the geography of areas that are protected within Article 10 or 12. So there's no reduction in wetland areas, there's no reduction in stream buffers, there's no reduction in floodplains. So just to be clear on that.
Okay. Okay, Jessica, you had your hand up. I hope we haven't made your headache worse.
Well, maybe, but I guess what I was going to say is I think that nice slideshow that is the comparison to the comp plan is maybe a little buried. And when you get to that overlay of our protections, our proposed protections over the map 7 and over the map 8, it's not super clear where Article 9 applies to on that map, because it shows the whole map of the entire city. But I think there's some confusion about where the Article 9 applies to. So I know the Meadowland area has come up multiple times because it's south of 89. I think a lot of people assume that it would apply there, but it doesn't. So I'm almost wondering if what would be helpful, Paul, is just to take that map you already have, but put the line around the Southeast Quadrant zoning area so that it's clear the area that Article 9 referred to. And then I think all the information's there, you know, as long as the legend is visible, is viewable, because I think the legend was a little like fuzzy. And at least that'll have all the information on the map.
Yes,
Paul
good
has
point.
already drawn that.
Just a sec, Mike, let Paul finish.
Yes, happy to do that. And to take that map and make it more prominent as two maps of map 7 and 8 and draw a box if we haven't already around the Southeast Quadrant zoning district. If that would help to make it more clear to folks, I could even pull out the language from 9.06 to Monica's point from before, and people can make their own interpretations as to whether that did or didn't have regulatory effect, so that it's all right there on one page. I think we could probably do that.
Perfect. Michael.
Well, I'm not sure why there's a question of whether it had regulatory effect or not. It was what was in it's what has been enforced since those regulations were written. So they have had regulatory force until now, anyway, and they've been effective. They aren't very comprehensive, but I don't see any reason why we should make a statement that they've been ineffective. They've been what we've been working with for years. We need to change them for sure.
I think Paul was actually talking about excerpting the language from 9 and putting it right there with the map so people could look at the language versus the map themselves. So
I understood that, but somebody else said that they were vague and
well, you know, so I guess people have different interpretations. So that's why having the actual language and letting people look at it would be good.
That's fine.
All righty. Anything else from the commission? Is there anything from the letters that were attached to the packet? Paul Ingalls.
I guess I'm concerned about the way this is presented to the public and to the council. You know, everything I've read so far has been the Planning Commission reported, the Planning Commission recommends, and, you know, our vote was 4-3. So I'd like to, you know, see that noted when presented by a vote of 4-3, the Planning Commission. But there is an alternative to that, and that is that it would be great if we could all get to the point where we could support whatever it is that we give to the city council. So I don't know what you four think about reaching out to us three, but I think it would be a good idea. And if you don't, then I wish you'd note that it's a 4-3 recommendation or a 4-3 report.
Yeah, I think, well, that's definitely reasonable, Paul. I think, you know, like I said, we're not going to do the policy discussion tonight, but we're definitely going to be going over, you know, all the comments and everything, you know, later on. And, you know, at that point, we'll maybe incorporate some, maybe not incorporate some, maybe change the language, maybe not change the language, but the end result will be that we'll have something that we'll feel we want to forward to the city council. And at that point, we'll again vote on it. And I absolutely agree that recording the vote and even recording who voted what, you know, is not a problem. I don't think. I think that's a very reasonable request.
Thanks, Bernie.
Does anybody have anything else that they want to add? I'll ask the commission first. Duncan.
Yeah, Chris Shaw in his letter actually had a really good point. I mean, we obviously, I don't personally, but the city, we know who the large landowners in the Southeast Quadrant are. And just some concern about had they been included in the process and have they been invited to the table? Paul, I don't know if that's a question for you.
Well, I guess what I can say, Duncan, is that there was information in the other paper. There's information that went out in the city newsletter, which goes to 8,000 households, or 8,000 individuals, excuse me. We've posted it on our website. We've put it on social media. We have not done a direct mailing to any property owners.
Well, I'm a property owner, but small.
Me too.
Duncan, were you trying to sort of identify the few very large landowners who might have more at stake than the rest of us?
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking that, you know, they're going to be very affected, small landowners too, but I think that if those folks aren't in the conversation at all, I think it's not going to benefit anybody.
Yeah.
They used to be the only people who could vote.
You know, we did a long time ago talk about directly contacting people whose property is on the map and having a change to it. We did talk about doing that a long time ago, probably pre-COVID. But we said if there were parcels, we said finding a way to reach out to those parcels that experience a change, just so they are aware. So I don't know how to do that. And now that we have the map, I don't know how many parcels that is and how complicated that would be. And I'm happy to volunteer to do any kind of outreach if it's wanted.
Yeah, we have heard from some. I mean, some of the bigger ones we've heard from UVM. Jeff Nick recently commented. We've heard from the Longs. But, you know, to your point, Duncan, and maybe a question for Paul Connor, you know, is there a way we can, you know, compare the mailing list with the property owners, or I don't know, you know, something that doesn't involve somebody spending hours and hours and hours, but something that, you know, maybe is there another mechanism to reach out that we haven't thought of?
Well, I guess what I would say is, you know, especially given that you've got the steep slope standards in there, and, you know, all the little bits and pieces, you know, I almost wonder if it would wind up being less work to mail every single person in the city rather than to try to parse it out, because in some manner, you know, we've talked about Butler Farms neighborhood, but that's a big undertaking to mail everybody in the city. And that's part of why we try to use the other paper as a method, because every household in the city gets the other paper rather than a direct mail. And so, if there was something that you would like to see as a different spread in the other paper, we could look at, I'd have to look at our advertising budget, but we could look at doing something that was a more targeted thing. That I think that would be more cost effective and a lot less time consuming, knowing that it reaches every household in the city.
And we use Front Porch Forum for the whole city too, right?
Yep, and that gets 40 or so percent of households, 40 or 50% of households. And then, as I said, the city newsletter reaches about 8,000 residents so about half.
Yeah, so that's pretty good coverage at that point. I mean, I definitely think, we have the public hearing coming up, so maybe a blast through all of our different media channels that, we're doing a public hearing, this is your chance. And, this is what we're, maybe some bullets of what we're covering, or, major changes. And, Jessica's article kind of, talked about that a little bit, but, maybe a, some kind of, quarter page flyer kind of thing with some bullets and an announcement of the public hearing in the other paper and on Front Porch Forum and in the newsletter. And, at that point, I think, we've probably, other than mailing to everybody in the city, we've probably done everything we can do, but in my opinion, so.
Aren't we legally obliged to post something in the other paper about a public hearing?
Yeah, but so, a lot of times, and it goes into the Free Press too, doesn't it, Paul? But it's more of a, it's stuck in
only the other paper as designated by the city council, and it was published last month.
Yeah, but that's kind of small print kind of stuff. I'm thinking more of a color, like Jessica had the the map with her article or something that kind of highlights in flashing colors that we're doing a public hearing. So
I think if a call to action within that message is, and here is a link where you can go to your property line, and if you go to your property and you see blue, yellow, these colors, and you have questions, call Paul or contact the planning.
That's a good one. Yeah, and here's his cell phone number.
He's up all night anyway, so go ahead and call him. No, but that's an amazing tool that's been created, and that may be a very clear invitation that people don't understand that they have access to.
That would be great. Ted,
I wanted to address something else that Chris Shaw said too, but I'm not.
Okay, Ted.
Yeah, just real briefly. I mean, Duncan's point's well taken, but I think you have to be living under a rock if you're a major landowner and are not aware of what's going on. Bernie mentioned, UVM, Patrick O'Brien, also Meadowlands representative, has been before us before. So, I think all the things that we've done, I think we've done what we can do. There's only so much that they can do. So.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else from the public?
I wanted to follow up on the Chris Shaw other paper thing though. The other comment, can I do that? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So this was something I thought we were going to be talking about, trying to address in this meeting, which is when I read Chris's letter, it seemed to imply that anything within the 500 flood is now, extreme protection. But we do have is it B1 and B2 levels of already built versus not built. And I think it's going to be very important to make sure people understand that. because I think people are jumping to the opposite extreme of, okay, it's the 500-year flood and we can't do anything there now, but we intentionally had that decision of the B1 versus B2. So whatever we can do to help be prepared to clarify that for people, I think would be good.
Okay.
I happened to do that today.
Okay. Anything else? Going once. Going twice.
We want Jessica to get better. We need her soon.
Yes. Yeah, we do.
Bernie
Bernie definitely
this?
does.
Before we meet again, to Paul Engel's point, the difference in our, the reason that we had a 3-4 vote, as I'm remembering it, is mostly tied to the 300-foot buffer versus the 100-foot buffer. But if there were other major differences of opinion, it would be really good for us to refresh our memory on what those differences were. Because as I'm if there was anything else, I would appreciate knowing that as we go into the hearing.
There were several.
Yeah,
there were several.
So maybe someone can just remind me of the meeting and I can look at the minutes or something.
Yeah, I don't remember offhand, but I remember several.
There were at least 3. I think one related to Chapter 9, the 906B3. One related to designating buffers around habitat blocks for supporting habitat. And the third one had to do with including in protection prime ag, grassland, and farmland. I think that those are the only 3 I can remember.
Yeah, and Michael, those 3, and to your point, Paul Engels earlier. So when we met with the joint meeting with the council, I did list those items as being a split 4-3 vote. So that split 4-3 vote was, at least put out during the council. And I apologize that I didn't specifically call that out in the article in this week's other paper. I should have done that we had, had some things that we were, grappling with and didn't come to agreement on.
Well,
And again, just for clarity, the habitat blocks as they're mapped are not just core, they do have some of the supporting habitat in them as mapped, right, Paul? Because they're not just core.
I want to be careful with my terminology. The mapped areas that Arrowwood selected included mature forest and transitional forest areas. Separately in the report, they used the term supporting habitat as an outside area. So I don't want to call this supporting because then we're mixing terminology. But what they mapped as a habitat block included what would commonly be considered to be a mature forest to a layperson like myself, and some areas that, as I described earlier, might be 20-year-old forest areas, things that are in transition towards forest using their Arrowwood methodology of where that line is.
So I would just add kind of at the end here, so we don't need an answer tonight, but maybe people can think about, how we're going to address comments during and after the official public hearing. My thought is, at a minimum, we would want to kind of categorize things into different buckets and have discussions on the bucket and then maybe a vote on the bucket. But, we can certainly talk about individual things as well. But again, I'm not looking, no answer tonight. I guess the homework is chew on it so that we can, because ultimately we're going to need to, by the end of the public hearing, agree on a methodology to address the comments and move it along. So you can be thinking about how best to do that.
Maybe we can group them for a start, because quite a number of people have asked the same question.
Right.
So,
well, that's what I was thinking too, is things seem to fall into some general categories. You know, certainly we've gotten comments on the wetlands. Certainly we've gotten comments on, you know, agriculture and grasslands. You know, and, you know, there's probably others. The habitat blocks, we've gotten a bunch of comments on. So, you know, maybe we can, like I said, come up with, you know, 5 or 6 different buckets and kind of get the gist of the comments. And, you know, and the comments, you know, as you know, that have read the letters, you know, they occur in both directions. You know, there's people that think we've gone too far and people that think that we haven't gone far enough. And they're all pretty passionate about that and have well thought out reasons for being passionate. And, you know, we're going to need to sort through that and decide what we want to do. So, Monica, then Michael.
Sorry, so I know to Francis's comment from before, I do think it is important to provide, if not for our review again, but I do think it's important to let the city council know what portions of the habitat blocks we as a commission did not accept from Arrowwood, if you will. I think it's a fair request, and maybe not something that we need to rehash again because we know where we did it and why we did it. But if, assuming that does come up to the city council level again in the next phase, I do think having that map available would be fair.
Okay, Michael.
Yeah, I was going to move that we move to item 5 on the
Which
agenda.
is
Approval of minutes.
Oh, okay. Do we have anything else from anybody else? So we can move to approval of minutes if Duncan.
Real quick, you guys had me there at the city council meeting. I was not there. I'm listed as being there, but I wasn't. So just wanted to make that one clarification.
Okay.
Other than that, I'm fine with the minutes.
Okay. Do I have?
Move to approve the minutes of March 23rd, March 31st, April 6th, April 13th, April 27th, as written, with the correction that Duncan has just made.
We have a second. Monica, you're seconding? Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Looks like it's unanimous. All right. Other business, Colchester Planning Commission. Paul, is there anything you wanted to add there? I know I always ask if they're doing stuff that we might be interested in. Was there anything that leapt out?
Yeah, I mean, they've made some tweaks to their form-based code, which is, I think, useful for us to keep an eye on of what lessons they've learned from Severance Corners. There's nothing that is directly affecting us, but it's good for us to look about how they've, you know, what they're learning. They have some minor tweaks related to electric vehicle charging that, you know, is a subject area that we'd really like to eventually take some action on, but nothing big that would either affect us or are big lessons learned for us.
Okay, cool. And you've got a link for anybody that's interested in watching that. So with that, anything else, or is there a motion to adjourn?
So
just a reminder that the public hearing next week is Thursday night.
Okay.
I wrote it down.
We got an 8th planning commissioner.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like that doggy.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Bernie,
All right.
Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for sharing. I was really not up for it tonight.
I'm glad you could be here, Jess. All right, everybody have a good one. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Enjoy the baby.
Good night, Dad.